That's weird. I didn't get an option to record on the cloud or locally. Well, hopefully this is working. All right. So yeah, I have my logged into my AWS account, and I have 12 months of the free tier. So I go into services, and then you can do a search for EC2. And EC2 is like the basic compute instance in AWS. So if you want to, have a server or something like that, something that actually uses computing power rather than just storage. So there's another storage service. So you do that here. So I don't know if there's a quick link. So I'll also go to instances, and then I'm gonna launch an instance. And here's a name. This doesn't really matter. So you start with a base image. So it's kind of like Docker in that way, but you can choose basically an operating system to run. So I'm just going to go with the Amazon Linux. And it's, some images you pay for. Many of them are free. This one is free. So I'll stick with that. That'll work fine. And then the instance type. So I'm just choosing, it's very small, but it's free tier, and it should work for what we're doing. So the next thing I have to do is this key pair login. So we're gonna have to SSH into this instance. So SSH just means basically we're gonna create a connection from the terminal, my local machine, to the terminal of the machine running in the cloud, so we can execute commands on there and stuff like that. So in order to do that, you have to create a key pair combo. So this is just like in HTTPS, where you have to have a certificate, and that's how the communication is encrypted. So I'm going to create a new pair here. So you don't have to really understand how this works. I don't really understand how it works, but we'll create this pair, and it's going to generate a file. I'll give it a name. So this will be called and it's just going to download this .pem file. So I'm going to save that locally here. One sec. I'll just throw that in here. You can see what that looks like. It's an encrypted key, and they're actually, you can go online and you can decrypt this, and it just gives information about the certificate authority and stuff like that. Okay, we don't need to worry about that. Okay, so I'm gonna try to do minimal stuff, allow SSH traffic from anywhere. I can also, yeah, so I'll just do actually, I'm going to use the existing security group. So we don't need to worry about that really. Okay, and configure storage. I'm just going to leave this as default. Number of instances default. So everything else should be fine. So I'll launch this. It should take a couple minutes. And I'll go back here so we can watch this. Let's see. Pending. So this will take just a minute. So in the meantime, I'll talk about the application. So I just went and got grabbed a random, where is this thing? Do I even have this? Let me see. Yeah, I must have closed it. Anyway, I found some random API that gives you like Linux questions. So I went there and I registered, and I got this API key. It's free, so I can share this on the video. I don't care about it. So here's the API key, and then here's the basic route, and then in order to format the request in a way that they want, I have to include this X API key header. And just in general, any header that starts with X is usually a custom kind of non-standard header. So X API key, that's just what they want. That's what their server is expecting. So you have to, do what they want you to do. And then I make this request, and that's pretty much it. Actually, sorry. So this is when I was testing it out. What I'm actually going to run is a small Flask app, which is going to have the same basic logic there. It's just going to, I have this route, which is going to be /nothing. It's going to run on port 8090. And then it's going to make that request and then return it. So nothing too fancy. And so this is my application, which I can run locally, and that's fine. But what I want to do is containerize it to control all of to make sure basically it will actually work in production, not just locally on my machine. So here's the Docker file. So I just chose more or less at random a Python image. So I'll go to Docker Python. So Docker Hub, again, is where you get Docker images, and there are some official images. Python has some official images, and you can choose kind of which version of Python and which operating system you want to use. So Alpine is the kind of most bare bones, and then there's some other ones you don't really need to worry about. Chose one more or less at random, but it's clearly defined. So if it works, then it should work, anywhere. And then in order to customize this a little bit, so here's the base image. So this is going to give me whatever operating system this works on, which I'm not sure, but whatever operating system this works on, there's another Docker image which actually installs Python and whatever, and I'm going to use this. So you can have a Docker image that's based on another Docker image. Then what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to copy over my code here into the image here. So I'm executing make_dir, which is a familiar command. So I'm creating this app, and then this work_dir is basically just saying, assume like everything, everything I do after this, just assume it happens in /app. So that's all this is doing. And then I'm gonna install the dependencies. I don't have a requirements file, but if I did, I would install the requirements file here. I just have one library, so let's do that. And then I'm copying over my code, the stuff.py. And then this CMD, it, for whatever reason, I don't know why, it takes a list of strings instead of just passing one command. I have no idea why, but so this is the command that will be run when you run the container. So I'll create the container, which is like creating the class. This is just the definition, kind of doesn't, in some sense, it doesn't really exist. But when I actually run the container, by default, it's going to execute this command. So when I actually go to create an instance of this and run it, it will execute Python stuff.py, which in turn, because name will be main, it's going to run this app. So it should just run this server. Okay. So I'm going to go back here, and now this is working. Okay, so I have my code. Oh, let me go ahead and create I'll build the image. So I'm going to do a couple things. I know this is going very quickly. This is just, think of this still just as exposure. So I'm going to do a couple things. One, just like GitHub or whatever, I could write code and then I can push it up to GitHub, right? And then anyone else can pull it down and use it. Something similar, basically parallel, is with Docker. So I'm going to create a Docker image, but then I want the Docker image to be put somewhere, on the internet where other people can access it. So we're going to do the exact same thing. So first, I'm going to build this image. And when I build it, sorry, this is a little small. So the command for building the image. So building is basically going to turn this description in the Docker file into an image. So Docker build, and then you can pass it some options. One of them is -t. I don't know why it's called -t, but that's the name that you give it, like a tag. That's probably why it's -t. So I'm going to call this, you can call it whatever you want, but because I want to push this up to Docker Hub, I have to format it in such a way that it contains my username. So it's going to be associated with my account on Docker Hub. So Chad Mowbray / and then I can call it this whatever I want. Pi API. And then so I pass it Docker build and then the actual command. So this is a flag. This is like a parameter. The last thing I need is where's the Docker file, right? So I'm going to build from a Docker file. Where's the Docker file? Well, I can just give it the current directory. There's just one Docker file here. So I can just give it the current directory. And it's going to go through. This went relatively quick because I had just built this to make sure that it would work. I didn't test everything, but so this is cached. But basically, Docker went through its whole process. It built the image. So now if I do Docker images, I can see that this exists. And I could run this. I could run this locally. I'm not going to do that right now, but I have this image now. So I have the image built. Now I want to push it up to Docker Hub so that it can be available anywhere. And the command for that is Docker push, and then just the name of this. So it'll take a second to upload. Okay, so that's done. So my image, just like if I had pushed code up to GitHub, I'm pushing code up to Docker Hub, or image up to Docker Hub. All right, so I think that's good from the application perspective. Now the more DevOpsy stuff. We have this instance, so I'm going to have to connect to the instance, and this is just a bare operating system, so it doesn't have anything installed. So I'm going to have to install Docker, and then pull my image down and then run it. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to click connect, and I get some pretty helpful steps to connect. So one, I'm gonna have to open blah, blah, blah. You don't need to worry about this. You can just use a command. So first off, I'm going to modify the permissions. So does anyone know what chmod does? 400?
Chmod in general, I understand that it will change like the permissions of a file or a folder.
Yeah, exactly. So I have this .pem file, which is the certificate, and the permissions are over here. If you do ls-l -l, you should get this. I'm doing A too, but if you do L, you can see, so it's execute, read, write. So there's 3 sets of 3, and it's for, I forget off the top of my head, but basically different user groups on your machine. So who has permission to read, write, and execute? So you can set those permissions for every file. So 400 is just an abbreviation. I think it's like, I forget, but it's kind of like binary counting. But anyway, whatever. So I'm just gonna copy this and run it. And if I look at this again, I can see that let's see if it was different. Yeah. So I've basically restricted the permissions. So this is only, you can only read this file now. Before, so anyway, so that's not strictly necessary, but that's fine. And then, so what I'm going to do is, here's basically the IP, here's the address of my instance running, and I'm going to take this. I'll copy this. So I'll be able to SSH into this node, and it's going to use this as my credential. So I'm kind of attaching this certificate, which I copied earlier, as the credential. So I'm going to run this, and you don't need to worry about this. Yes. Okay, so now I'm actually inside. So I'm in the terminal of my remote machine. I can do ls. There's really nothing there. So what I'm going to do now is add this somewhere. Yeah. So I'm just going to copy a couple commands to get Docker installed, basically. So I just, for reference, I'm just looking at some random website that I found that lists all the commands to install Docker. So here's the first one. So I'm just updating, just like, brew. If you do brew install, you update. So yum is just the basically equivalent of brew. And then there's so Amazon Linux has a package for Docker, which is nice. So I can install that. So super user do. So I'm executing this as a super user. Amazon Linux extras install Docker. Okay, yes. So all this is happening on my remote compute EC2 instance. Okay, I got all that going, and then I'll just do a couple more. So sudo service docker start. Okay, so Docker is going, and then I'll just do one other command here. So this is just changing the permissions. And then let's see. All right, so I'm gonna exit and then go back in so those permissions get picked up. Okay, so still there. Blah 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 blah. Okay, so now I'm connected there, and I think the machine should be able to run Docker now. So now what I'm going to do on here is pull from that repository. So I pushed to Docker Hub. I built the image right here, and then I pushed to Docker Hub. So I should be able to pull that down here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Docker pull, and then it's Chad Mowbray, whatever I called that, Pi API, I think. So that's actually pulling down now. So I built it on my local machine. I pushed it up to Docker Hub, and now I'm on another machine somewhere else, and I'm pulling it down there. So this will take a second. Okay, so I'll do all Docker images, and I can see that this exists right here. So now I have the image. So what I want to do is run, I want to basically create an instance of this image. So I want to run an instance of this image. I'm just going to look at the application. So I'm going to run it, and I'm going to have to map the ports. So you don't need to worry about this, but so if I run this application as is, it will run, but it's just running inside of this Docker container, which is like an isolated environment. So I can't directly reach the application from outside of the machine. So what I have to do is I have to map a host port to this Docker container port. So my host in this case is the EC2 instance that I'm currently logged into. So I'm gonna have to pick a port on this machine and say, anytime someone talks to port whatever on this machine, I want you to basically forward the request to this port, which is where my application is running. So to run, Docker run, and then the image name, which is Chad Mowbray / Pi API. And so this is the basic command, Docker run, and then the image name, but I want to pass it some options. And I think the only option I need to worry about right now is the port. So -p. And I can just pick an arbitrary port. I'll do 4545. I could do the same port. It doesn't really matter. So this is the host port. So 4545 is the host port. And then inside my application, I need to make sure it's this because that's what my application is running on. So 8090. Okay. No module name Flask. So I think I forgot something when I pushed the image. I need to install. So I only installed requests, but I need to install Flask. So I know it's 6 o'clock, so feel free to bounce. This is all voluntary anyway, but I'll go ahead and I'm gonna have to let me see what I can do here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back, rebuild the image, push it, and then pull it down again. So it'll just take a couple minutes. All right, so open up another terminal here. So now I'm back on my local machine. And I'm going to, let's see. So first off, I'm gonna delete, let me see, Docker images. Yeah, so I'll delete, I'll just leave it there for now. So I'm gonna rebuild it. So Python, or not Python, Docker build -t, and I'll call it Chad Mowbray. I can actually give this another version. I think that will work. So /pi API : I'll just call it 2. I could give it, I think you can give it a full version name. So I'll just call it 1.2. Okay, and so I'm going to push this up again. So Docker push, and then Chad Mowbray /pi API : 1.2. Oops. Pi API 1.2. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my remote machine and do Docker pull Chad Mowbray /pi API : 1.2. So notice that this was a lot faster. You may have noticed. So one thing that Docker does is it builds things in layers so that it can reuse stuff that already exists. So I'm going to make sure that this exists, Docker images, and I have the tag, the 1.2, like the version tag. So I'm going to run this again. 1.2 with updated. So hopefully this will work now. Okay. Okay, so this is running. So I have the Python application running, and let's see. So hopefully I should be able to access it now from there. So let's try, what was I doing this? Let's try curl. Let me grab the public. So I have a public address here. So I'll grab that and I'll try to curl this. So curl with that, and then I need to give it the port number. And I said to map, what did I say? Was 4545? Does anyone remember? I guess that was correct. So I got back a bunch of JSON now. Maybe I should make this a little bigger. So this is just a big, jumble of nonsense, but this is the response that we're getting from the API. So I have this application, which is going to make a request to this endpoint. I've packaged it up in a Docker container, pushed it up to Docker Hub, and then on my remote machine, I download it and I run it, and I map the ports. And so now when I go there, it's basically listening. It's just a server. It's listening. This is not a production grade server, obviously, but it's listening. And when I make a request, it in turn makes another API request somewhere else, gets a response, and then returns it to me. So any questions about that? It's a lot. It's very confusing. There's a lot of steps. And if you're new to it, which I think all of you are, then yeah. Are there any questions about any of that?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm following along with everything, but let's just say, for example, trying to check and test the Docker image on a local machine. So let's say I pull down the Docker image that you posted on Docker Hub,
Mhm.
and I try to run it locally. It works and it states the IP address and port number it's running on. Do I also have to try to access it through curl, or is there a different way?
I mean, you can really access it through anything. So, because I specified a weird port, if I had it run on like port 80, then I think you'd be able to use a browser. But yeah, any tool where you can make a, it can act as an HTTP client will work. So curl or Postman or, depending on the port, your browser. So one thing that you do have to make sure to do is if you're running it locally. So if you've pulled down the image, you have to make sure when you run it, you're doing the port mapping. Because if you don't, let's see, like right here, if you don't map the ports, then the application will run. So if I just didn't include this, if I just did Docker run and then the image, then it would run, but it would just be running inside of its own environment, and there would be no way to access it. So you have to map it so that it's available to the outside world.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, then I'll stop